Hey, what's up? It's Jake from Nimbus DevOps, and we're going to do some more coding examples. So before I go on to loops, I want to do a little odd or even practice here, kind of like I did with my previous little character input guy. And so go ahead and create a file, name it whatever you want. I'm numbering mine to make them easy to tab complete, to odd or even.py. So here's our first challenge. So we want to ask a user for a number. Okay, but we're going to do this a little bit the more complicated way to do some error validation, which is something I said that we would do once we went over conditionals, and I made a promise I'm going to deliver on it. So first thing we need to do is make a number, and we're just going to say input, and I'll just say enter, enter a number. Okay. And then for right now, just to test this, we're just going to print out the number. So Python, name of the file, enter a number, 42, prints 42. Perfect. Done, right? No. Okay, so first of all, let's turn this into a statement here. So I'm going to do a quotation. Right before that, I'm going to put an F, and then in curly brackets, I'm going to say num as a variable. But I'm going to use a sentence and say your number is num, right? Something like that. And then we need a closing quotation. Okay, so now if I run it, 42, your number is 42. Okay, this is looking a little bit better, right? But what if my number is 42.0? What happens? Enter a number, 42.0. Your number is 42.0. Interesting. Now, along with printing this, I also want to print the type so I can show you what's happening here. So if I print out the type of num at end, the data type, we'll see that 42 is a string. Now, if I try to do anything with that, it's not going to work, right? If I try to add it to something, right? So if I did print the type and then I said print num plus 2, that should be 44, right? If I enter 42 again. But in fact, you get an error, can only concatenate string not int to string. So we need to change this. We need to convert it somehow. And the easiest way to do this is to say, well, hey, we said that this num is a variable, right? And it's a string. So I should be able to just turn this into an integer, right? And you would be correct. You can wrap this in int function, and now number is an integer. So if I say, let's go ahead and leave our print type num that we created and run this again. 42, your number is 42, class int. Perfect. But what happens if I put 42.0? Invalid literal for int with base 10, 42.0. In other words, it can't convert base 2 or base 10 decimal notation into an integer because it's saying here that there's some sort of value error, right? I mean, we can't even print out the type. If I put it up top here, maybe we'll see it. 42.0. Nope. So you can't do that. Enter a number with a decimal. So, and that's because 42.0 is supposed to be a float. So at first, what's happening is it's taking 42.0 as a string, and it's trying to convert this string into an integer, and it can't do that because first it needs to be a float, a floating decimal point number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the input 42.0 and I'm going to convert it to a float. Then I'm going to convert the float to an int, and then the num variable type is, or data type should be int. So now let's try it and see what happens. 42.0. Class int, your number is 42. And we notice that it dropped to 0. So what happens if I enter 42.5? It still says 42. So we might want to say your number as an integer is 42. That way maybe it makes a little sense why we're dropping this decimal. Okay. Now what if they type a word? What if somebody enter a number and somebody says 2 like that? It's going to break, right? Because it's a string and you can't convert it to a float or an integer. So we need to find a clever way to convert this into some sort of condition that says using an if-else statement. So how I'm going to do this, excuse me, is I'm going to create a function. I'm going to define my function, and I'm just going to call this check type, and I'm going to pass it a number. Okay, I'm going to pass it a variable num. And what I'm going to show you that's going to be new today is something called try except. So this is a try except condition where you will try something, right? And if that doesn't work, it will do something else. Okay. So now let's do something. So we want to try something. So we want to try whatever the value is that we're creating. I'm just going to create a variable value, and we're going to do the same thing. Int, float, and then num. So we're going to get this number saved here. They're going to input it, and then we want to say convert it to a float, convert it to an int, and set that to a variable value. Okay. Now, if you can do that, print. Let's do f. I'll just copy and paste this. Boop. Copy. Paste. In fact, I don't even need this anymore. And I don't need this anymore. Okay. So now this says, hey, we're going to check. We created this this function called check type. Try this. The value is going to be whatever num is. Make that into a float, and then make that into an int. So just like we did before, I'm just setting it to a different variable name inside of here. And then if that works, I want you to just print this. If there's an error, you'll get like an exception error of some kind. We need to do something else. Well, in our case, we're simply just going to print out that there's a problem, right? So I'm going to print error. You did not enter a number. Something like that. Okay. Like, please try again. Will be nice. Okay. So that should be it. Now we're not using this function yet. We have to call it. So the next thing, now that I created a function, I'm going to have a variable declared here and assign it to whatever this input is after I convert it. And then I'm going to run my function. I'm going to run check type, and I'm just going to pass it num, this variable here. And then that should work. And that's how we're going to check our stuff. Okay, so let's try it. So we'll just run our little script here, enter number 42. Your number as an integer is 42. So it was able to do this, and so it printed this out. Let's try a decimal number, 42.0. It was able to do this, so it printed this out. So now let's try typing the word 2. 2. Could not convert string to float. Now we got this kind of like garbage error thing right here, number float, blah, 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 blah. So we might want to try something different. Let's see here. And maybe that's because what we actually, let's see here. What do I want to do? Num, int, float, input, check type, num. Okay. And we're getting a value error here, so we're just passing that, and that makes sense, and people can figure that out. So we define our function as check type, pass a number, and then we try value equals int float num and print out our message. And if that doesn't work, we put an exception that just prints error. You did not enter a number, please try again, which is not printing for some reason, right? It's not printing at all. And so we got to figure out why, right? So let's take a look at our variable. So num equals int float input. Please enter a number, and then that looks fine. And then we do a check type of num, and that looks fine. But it says here there's a value error before it even gets that far, right? It can't even get that far. So what if I take this out here and I just say, oops, let me get out of that, input. Let's see what happens. So if I enter a number, that works. If I enter a decimal, that works. If I enter a word, it doesn't. So the whole reason you would do a try is because you can try this without entering this into here. Now the problem you're going to run into with this is that if um, if this works, we do the check type and the type works, then you actually have to save it as something, because right now, if I said, okay, after you check it and you make sure it's right, let's check the type. And I use 42.0. Oh, I probably want to print this, huh? Print and got it. And it's okay to like do little pieces of code in there that you're going to remove just to test things. But you'll see it passed, but it says that the class is a string. And that's because all the conversion happened in here. But if you don't do this check first, it's going to fail. Okay, so if it does work after this, then we can say, okay, if you try this and it works, then that'll go ahead and work. After check type, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to convert this into some sort of like actual converted number. So we'll just use res for response, and the response that we're going to get, we should have some sort of int float num, because that's actually going to work now. And we could go ahead just to check this. We could just print our response here, and let's enter 2, and we can see that it can't convert it, right? And if we enter 42.0, we can see that that does work. And if I want to print the type of response, because we see that that works, you can see that 42.0 is in fact an integer. So now I don't need to print this anymore. We know that that works. Okay, so that works. So now what, right? Well, now we can say that we've asked the user for a number, and we can in fact validate that it is a number, and we've converted it, and we can go ahead and print this out. And it does this in a it does this here, is where it's printing from. So we don't really need to print anything, because it's doing it inside of my loop, if that makes sense. So if I do this, 42, your number as an integer is 42. Okay, cool. So we asked for a number. So now the next trick is to determine if the number is even, or I always say odd or even. Odd or even. Okay. So now what do we do? Well, now we have this number. Now we can do something with it, right? So let's try defining a function called odd or even. I know, weird name for this. And we're just going to pass it our response, and then go, what does this do? Well, if the response is, we'll say modulo 2, which divides something by 2 and then gives you the remainder, and it has a remainder of 0, well, then we would just print out that it's even, right? So f response is an even number, like that. If that's not true, I'll just say else. Else print, let's see, response is an odd number, something like that. And we can go ahead and check this, but first we need to call this function. So I'm just going to say odd or even and pass our response into it. Makes sense? All right, let me clear my screen. So let's try old 42. Your number is as an integer is 42. 42 is an even number. Let's try 41. 41. Your number as an integer is 41. 41 is an odd number. Sweet. So that works. So let's now say that you have another requirement that says print a different message if the response is, or I should say if the input is a multiple of 4. Okay, well, how would you do that? Easy. I'm going to change this to elif, and I'm going to add another if statement and just say if response mod 4 equals 0, then I'm going to print a different message and just say, let's see, response is an even number and a multiple of 4, something like that. And this needs to be closed. Okay, cool. So let's try that. Make sure all of our code works still. 42. Okay, that looks good. 41. What about 44? Sweet. Although I kind of want a period for consistency. Okay, so that works. Let's see, what else can we do? So after this, I'm gonna just print a blank line, and we're gonna do a different test and say next test. ... Okay. And let's say we want them to, let's say ask for 2 values and find out if they are divisible by each other. Something like that. Something strange. So we'll just say, okay, so we need 2 values, right? So we'll say value 1 is, and we'll do our little check here. And I'm going to skip all of the try catch errors but for now, but you get the point with that. So feel free to do that if you want to. So enter a number to be divided. Okay. And then I'm going to copy this. Value is going to be 2. And I'm going to say enter a number to be divided by. Okay. And then all I have to do is the math. So I'm going to define a function called numcheck, I guess. And then we're going to pass value 1 and value 2 to numcheck. And in here, I'm going to say if value 1 mod value 2, value 2 equals 0, equals 0, then we want to print your first number can be evenly divided by your second number, period, something like that. And if it can't, I just say else, and I print the exact same thing, except I say that it cannot be evenly divided by your second number. And then, of course, I have to call the function. So I'm just going to say numcheck and pass value 1 and value 2. And we'll give it a try. Clear. 42. Next test. Enter number to be... Oh, man. Wait, let's close. I need to learn how to spell. Divided by. Okay, there we go. Now let's try it. 42. Even number. Enter number to be divided. I did not save that well. 10 divided by 2. Your first number can be evenly divided by your second number. Sweet. All right, so let me save this file because I misspelled it here as well because I'm consistent like that. Okay, so let's try 41. 41, it's an odd number. 9 divided by 4. Your first number cannot be evenly divided by your second number. And then finally, a multiple of 4, which we'll do 40. Looks good. And we've already checked both of these. 10 divided by 10. Your first number can be evenly divided by your second number. All right, so there you go. So this is an example of how to use the try except, or if in JavaScript, you'll use the try catch. So in Python, we call this a try except. So this is how you would do that and define that in a function and how you call the function. And I'm just using variables and I'm using data type conversions. I've got another function, and I've got this if and an elif and an else, and then I've got 2 numbers being passed as some sort of set, and I'm using those to do some sort of mathematical operation, and I'm calling that function. So I'm trying to use as much as I can that we've gone over. And if I close this, you can see all of the code, and this is what it is. So have fun with this challenge, and if you want, you can just uh, type this first part into your own file and see if you can solve it a different way. And I think you might have a little bit of fun with that. So anyways, let me know if you have any questions, and have fun.